Atomic Heart is pretty good. It's not anything revolutionary. I wouldn't really say there's a single thing this game does that's really unique. And it has a few aspects that, for some people, it can be an outright turnoff. But I actually enjoyed my time with it overall. Atomic Heart is a relatively linear first-person shooter taking place in the fictional futuristic post-war world somewhere in the mid to late 1900s, in which Russia managed to discover technology known as polymers, which became the basis for a massive scientific and economical boom. Such inventions include neurological devices that you can wear, which allow users to take control of autonomous machines, energy-based weapons, and borderline magic, all delightfully rendered with a retro-futuristic style that I just can't get enough of. This art style is such a weird glimpse into the mindset of the past. Things were already designed with a very different approach than the more sleek and minimal styles of today. So seeing people think of the future not from an advancement and efficiency standpoint, but more from the approach of, well, it's what we have now, but we can make it way better. That creates an art style that I just find woefully underrepresented. But like all good utopian stories, something has to come in and fuck it all up. After an arduously long opening sequence to set up the world building, you are asked to go from the flying Russian city all the way to the ground to meet with a scientist for some upgrades. And not 5 seconds from reaching the surface, all hell has already broken loose as every last robot has gone berserk and turned the entire facility into a smoldering ruin because people use these robots for pretty much every last aspect of their life. Yeah, this is basically just BioShock, even down to the gameplay too for the most part. So jumping right into the gameplay, at first you're largely just presented with a series of hallways to explore for resources, ammo, and possible solutions for puzzles. There are regularly hidden away side rooms that require some secret hunting to reach. One nice thing about exploration is you can see everything that can be picked up using your scanner, and the range is massive, so you'll never knowingly miss a secret since you'll always be able to see what's there to grab. So secret hunting in this game is less about rubbing your face against every single corner of a wall hoping there's something there, and more just trying to figure out how to get to someplace. And some of these are pretty cleverly hidden. Like, I actually quite like the secret hunting in this game. And despite being linear, I quite like the level design. It makes good use of the buildings having multiple levels and various branching hallways that not only will you sometimes open up paths back to previous rooms to make backtracking for things you might have missed easier, but you could also spend an hour or more in a given section, and in reality you've only stayed in the same few hundred square foot of location. It helps make the game feel less like you're just running in a straight line all the way to the end. But once you leave the initial sections of the game, where it just spends a lot of time guiding you through facilities, it opens up significantly more for brief periods. And I say brief periods because your objective marker is always on screen, and if you go to it, you'll continue the story and go back through more linear areas. But if you choose to mess with it, you're presented with a fairly large open environment to explore. It's not particularly dense. There's only a few major landmarks you can explore with a fair bit of empty space in between. For the most part, it's just a vehicle for the testing chambers you can find, and also offering some extra buildings you can search for some resources. Really the biggest issue with the open world is that fighting enemies is just annoying. There's cameras everywhere, and if they see you, it'll start spawning enemies, and if the cameras see you attack any enemies, it'll just endlessly spawn enemies until all the cameras are dead. But it endlessly spawns in repair drones to keep repairing the cameras, keep repairing the things you've killed, and unfortunately, killing the things you just killed, it doesn't even give you extra resources. So if you fuck up, you're just gonna be stuck in there until you die endlessly fighting enemies for no reward. On the map, you'll see these markers indicating the general area of a testing chamber, and it becomes your job to figure out how to get in. Some are pretty simple. Find a tower that lets you use cameras to turn on the door directly, but others require a few more steps, like this one small town that's absolutely infected with organic enemies, and the balloon that allows the cameras to function is wrapped in massive roots. I had to clear the town, find out how to get into the sewer system under the town, fight my way through there, solve a puzzle to overheat the boilers, causing the entire thing to explode and burn the roots. And then I could use the cameras to open the chamber. Oh, and for some reason the music was an absolute fucking bop for this one random corner of the map. And I'm now gonna take the opportunity to praise this game's soundtrack. It's mostly licensed music, but it is done very well because the music is almost all remixed to heavy metal or hard synth versions of these songs. Some of the original songs are vastly different tonally, and it's great. One song in this game, Trava Doma, is basically a metal version of Russian country roads. And this soundtrack goes all over the place too. One moment you're listening to heavy metal version of Flight of the Gladiators, then moments later you're fighting for your life as a bubblegum pop version of Carmen is playing, and then an hour after that you'll be listening to Sabre Dance as a boss's theme. It's to the point where I don't want to go into too much detail on them because knowing ahead of time almost ruins some of the impact because of how funny it is. But this one instance is just the tip of the iceberg, so I'll just show it. Heal me, bitch! Oh, why is this becoming a fucking EDM remix now? The fuck? I fucking love this game. And the original songs are also really fucking good too. It was made primarily by Geoffrey with a number of tracks also done by Andrei Bergov and Mick Gordon. Though I can't really verify how many tracks the latter two worked on, Mick Gordon only seems to have worked on 2 tracks credited to him, which is surprising because of how well Geoffrey pulls off the style Mick Gordon has been known for post-Doom. But going back to the levels though, the test chambers are actually really cool. I didn't get around to doing all of them, for a reason I'll go into later, but all the ones I played were actually pretty damn engaging Portal-like dungeons where you complete a puzzle, explore a tiny bit of the halls, or do some combat, and go to the next chamber. In these, you can find some blueprints for new weapon upgrades. And the reason I didn't do them all is because the overworld is best enjoyed as a small break between the story elements I found. At several points of the game, you'll return to the overworld with your task being go to this thing to advance the story, but because you get thrown back into the overworld at different points, you can just explore the surrounding area a bit and do the nearby test chambers, or hunt down the ones that has an upgrade you want, since each chamber has the upgrades you can find listed on them. I find that this game has more than enough to be satisfying without having to do everything in the overworld, especially since the overworld is just really sparse beyond those test chambers. And when I talk about games, I usually talk about what I enjoyed the most first, which tends to be the gameplay. But for a large part of the beginning of this game, I was enjoying the art and levels more than I was enjoying the combat. It wasn't bad, just at the start it can be very slow and methodical. Really, the art was also the primary reason I wanted this game. I came in thinking that even if this game was aggressively mediocre, or even bad, so long as the art was on par with those trailers they were putting out years ago, I would have been more than happy with my time spent. So it's a good thing this game is actually very fun to play as well. Moveset wise, you get a dash, a lightning power that's always ready, and 2 interchangeable powers which can be fired from your offhand. Weapons wise, you have a small variety of melee weapons and guns. Melee weapons have a very weak light attack and a heavy attack that you'll end up using in the vast majority of situations. Like, dear god, that light attack is horribly ineffective in this game since you can't really stagger lock enemies. It's just better to go for that one good hit and then dip. Guns are also split into 2 categories: ballistics that use ammo, and energy weapons which use your energy bar that slowly regenerates over time or when you use a melee weapon. And don't be stingy with it either, because your energy bar is only used for those weapons. Your abilities all work off of their own meters. And when it comes to applying this arsenal to the enemies, it's pretty straightforward. Enemies largely will just try and run at you and hit you, so just use your dodge to get out of the way. They do have stronger attacks, which are indicated by a pulsing orange sound telling you that's probably a good time to dodge, and if you get hit, those attacks will knock you down. And my god, will enemies use the fuck out of them. Eventually you'll just reach a point where it feels like those are the only attacks you're dodging, and you can kind of just eat the other hits. So that is admittedly one problem this game has. While the knockdown attacks are pretty easy to dodge, they're also very common, so sometimes if you're surrounded by enemies and don't have much room to dodge, you'll just get knocked down over and over again. Probably the most interesting part about fighting with enemies is kind of the degree of preparation that goes into this game, and it can make dealing with these enemies much easier. Every enemy has their own set of resistances and weaknesses, and this includes weapon types and not just elemental damage types. An enemy can be weak to ballistics while resisting energy weapons. With ballistic weapons and melee, you have the option to attach an elemental canister to apply elemental damage and status effects, which can help if an enemy isn't weak or even resists guns, but is weak to a status effect. For example, there's a particularly aggressive enemy who resists all range damage, but is weak to melee. A huge dick move though, making this tanky and cracked out motherfucker weak to melee, but it's also weak to fire. So, just grab a fire vial, slap it on your Kalishnikov, and light his ass up and watch the stacking fire damage tear his ass apart. You can also enhance this with the abilities available. Should you want to lean into melee, you can grab mass telekinesis and a shield that just lets you get free hits on everything. Or if you enjoy elemental effects, you can equip the polymer jet to slow things down and enhance elemental effects to pair with a fire weapon, your electricity power, or just bring some freeze along too. And while these abilities are strong, very strong in many cases, you are still fairly vulnerable. At the start of the game, you have to play a lot more carefully and slowly since resources to make ammo and consumables are still pretty limited, and also enemies are pretty tough. But you can upgrade your weapons and powers slowly, and when you do, you'll usually have a much easier time with the area you're in before the game starts to throw something new at you and it just gets hard again. This cycle continues for most of the game, but it still trends on the side of getting easier and easier since you'll still see plenty of the previous enemies alongside the harder enemies, making resources generally a lot more plentiful. By the end of the game, the difficulty can become non-existent beyond bosses. And I kinda love that. The last fifth of the game is just steamrolling through enemies, and if you get lucky, even bosses stand no chance. For reference of how insane this gets, at the start of the game you'll be taking about 2 to 3 shotgun blasts to kill the most basic droid. All you can really do is shock them, or if you're a little further in the game, you can use a shield to block their damage, and freeze them to make one-on-ones easier, but you'll still get fucked with anything more than just 1 to 2 enemies. But by the end, I'm freezing entire packs of enemies in half the time, hitting them with my melee to get almost an entire energy bar in one swing, and using that to just stand in front of mini-bosses, spamming what is literally just a BFG round into their face. And why did I mention getting lucky with regards to bosses? Well, it kind of comes into one major problem this game has. Blueprints are barely tied to progress. They might only drop based on story progress, so you can't find the railgun from the first chest you open, but you can actually beat the game and not have all the weapons unlocked. This is because weapons come from chests, completely random. You can even get the same weapon blueprint multiple times. It does nothing for you, it'll just say, hey, you found this weapon you already own, that's it, get fucked. And for some reason, this applies to weapons given to you by the game itself, with the exception of one. Seriously, no matter what, do not dismantle the weapons you get at the start of the game until you have the blueprints for them. Which is fun, because early on in the game, it tells you to experiment all you want with your resources, since dismantling and respeccing refunds 100% of the resources, which is actually fantastic. So I did that, because I wanted a medium range option with an upgraded pistol over my upgraded shotgun. But since I was under the assumption this was a cleverly designed game, I thought, hey, I had the shotgun, I could just make it again, right? Nope, I did not have the shotgun blueprint, and I did not find it for the rest of the game. And granted, that was mostly because apparently it was actually bugged on launch when I played it, and the shotgun blueprint straight up did not exist. Like, you could not get it. However, I still have heard reports of people who beat the game missing a few blueprints. Could it be because they rushed it or didn't explore enough? Possibly, but it still can happen. And so that's the reason why I say getting lucky. Because the rocket launcher is genuinely, utterly fucking broken. Barely anything resists explosives. Hell, the bigger boys are weak to it. And my understanding, it is one of the only explosive weapons in the entire game. Around the time you can get it, you probably not only found a lot of ammo for it scattered around, but it's also horrendously cheap for that point of the game. Really, the only trade-off is thinking of what weapon or consumable to put away in place of more ammo for this damn thing. But you can also straight up kill bosses with just 2 units of ammo on the highest difficulty. It's just so busted. I've even seen people kill a boss on the lower difficulties with less than a full clip of rockets. And the best part about the rocket launcher, the shield ability protects you from self-damage. The shield can also heal you when it blocks damage, so you can straight up run at things, shoot at your feet, and heal from it. Really, between the shield and an item that gives you super fast dodge recharge and health regen, it becomes super hard to die. Playing without the shield did make it noticeably harder, since you can't just stand in front of enemies and bosses, but it wasn't massively harder, save for the final boss, which is kind of a bitch, but in a good way. So while it can get really messy towards the end, it can also be very fun if you just like the absolute carnage this man can unleash, which is especially funny since this game actively acknowledges it takes place over several days, despite it always being day, and that the main protagonist has not slept once. So you have this cracked out Russian man running on no sleep for several days, dashing around one-handing a rocket launcher while snorting nano cocaine through his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, I present you the weakest Slav. But other than that, the biggest problem I would say this combat has is the overall lack of enemy variety. It's not terrible, but many enemies either have similar attacks outside of one unique thing they do, they look near identical to another enemy, or you basically fight them the same no matter what enemy it is, since most of your abilities just render them immobile. That does make it sound worse than it is. It isn't that bad, but it's still not ideal. So, with the gameplay out of the way, all that's really left is the story and the acting, which is a mixed bag. I overall enjoyed it, but it is full of so many holes. Nearly every last robot you fight is just there to help people do industrial, agricultural, or other light labor activities. Sure, makes sense you'd be strong and can overpower people, but why the fuck do they have lasers coming out of their face and have missile pods strapped to them? And as I understand the story, and to try and avoid spoilers, the robots having weapons doesn't really play into any part of the overall plan. The story also really likes to use twists. There's about 6 twists in this whole game, and 3 happen in the last 20 minutes, making the ending just feel so weird. The ending itself is a whole other can of what the fuck. You can skip to this timestamp on the screen to avoid spoilers, because I'm gonna talk about it. So, turns out, the glove you have isn't exactly an AI, but it's a replication of a friend of the guy who's been giving you orders the entire game, named Sechenov. He had killed a friend and turned him into a living polymer thing that he acknowledged from the start of the game as a very special object and to take care of it. But when confronted at the very end of the game, Sechenov suddenly knows the glove was the one who was responsible for fucking with the main character, making him go unconscious on murder sprees, and convincing him to confront Sechenov. Yet at no point did this ever concern him and say, hey, maybe take off that glove. Don't worry. Well, turns out the glove was the evilest of the evil. Still not sure if Sechenov is truly evil, but probably is to some extent. The glove fries the ever-living fuck out of you, sends you into drug limbo that you've been through it several times in the game, while he fuses with a special turbo polymer that you saw once, and then fucks off after destroying the only device that can 100% override all robots, while going on about how humanity has no future and that, I guess, becoming living cum monsters is the future of life. His motivations are entirely unexplained beyond all humans want a satisfaction on someone else's dime, which might mean he's pissed at Sechenov having killed him and turned him into jizz, but there's also no further background than that unless it's hidden in various lore notes throughout the game that I didn't read because there's a fucking lot of them. Supposedly, you're left unconscious on the floor in this man's office while you're off starring in the new Super Mario Bros. Movie. And of all people in this game, the glove knows how insanely powerful and capable this dude is, and the special turbo polymer he took over is capable of dissolving bodies in seconds. So why the fuck did he not just kill you? Best part? You're given a choice before confronting Sechenov. Do you continue playing the game and fight the final boss, or do you say fuck it and leave? Well, the best ending might actually be the fuck off ending, because when you do that, he suddenly puts the pieces together in his head, rips out the polymer from his hand, and then leaves. Now, maybe I'm missing a few things. I am kind of an idiot and I've never been great at interpreting stories, but I just spent the 20 minutes after watching the final cutscene thinking, what the fuck? But a different kind of what the fuck than the other ones that came during the game. But regardless of how confusing all that was, it was a genuinely solid setup for the sequel. They establish a villain, create a barrier to stopping the catastrophe from the get-go, and there's even a possible solution all teased within the first game. The possible disaster that will unfold has a lot of potential, and while the story beats might have been confusing or mediocre, they were at least fun and had some cool ideas, which is a good summary for this game. Regardless of the details, they at least have a lot of cool ideas. Well, maybe not the horny fridge though. An even better example of this is that the game has a lot of interesting background for the story that is relevant, but the way it tells it through large chunks of several minutes of pure dialogue while you're walking around and solving puzzles, it's too much at once. Speaking of dialogue, it's a mixed bag. Everyone's voice acting is solid, except for the main character, who ranges from flat to pretty decent sometimes, but the protagonist is such an endlessly mad prick. Not exactly unreasonably so, considering what's going on, but dear lord, he is an aggressive son of a bitch to literally everyone and everything around him. It's also funny how he'll drop every swear known to man, on top of a few slurs to anyone who isn't Russian in this game, but one of his default exclamations is fucking crispy critters. That had to be lost in translation, there's no way it wasn't. The localization job is good enough for things to make sense, but sometimes dialogue won't match the subtitles word for word, and there's a few cases where item names are different depending on where you see them. Like, this upgrade for the pistol is called the revolver-type bolt frame in several places, but when I open the chest to get the item, it tells me it's the reinforced bolt frame, which actually makes more sense given the upgrade makes it so you just fire a burst of 4 shots almost like a shotgun. It has nothing to do with revolvers. So that's Atomic Heart. Just give me more. It has its issues with the story and characters being largely unforgettable and vague, and while the gameplay wasn't anything unique, it was a great mix of solid mechanical foundations, holding up an incredibly stylistic approach from both the soundtrack and the art. I really hope these guys can make a sequel and then just do it better.